The other thing is we've got that unenviable record of being, if we lose today, the worst ever team in the league.
Today's video tells the story of the worst ever English Football League team and how they ended up in such a state. From stadium fires to managers sacked 30 minutes before kickoff to rousing team talks.
Just remember what Churchill said. Never give up!
This video has it all and will leave you in no doubt that the Doncaster Rovers team of 1997-98 was the worst English Football League team ever. "46 games played, 4 wins, 8 draws, 34 losses, 30 goals scored, 131 goals conceded. The Doncaster Rovers team of 1997-98 holds the record for the most losses in a single league season and is regarded as the club's darkest hour. But how did they end up being so historically terrible? Like most awful teams, it starts with complete incompetence from top to bottom. And for Doncaster Rovers, this incompetence at the top came in the form of Ken Richardson. Ken Richardson bought Doncaster Rovers in 1993, 4 years before the disaster season of 97-98. Ken Richardson had, to say the very least, a checkered past. While the man had experience in sport, it'd be hard to argue it was the kind of experience that would make you want him as the owner of your football club. Prior to getting involved in football, Richardson was at the centre of one of the biggest betting scandals in British history during his time in horse racing. Ken Richardson's horse Flockton Grey made its debut as an unfancied 10-to-1 underdog under a trainer who hadn't had a winner in over 2 years. So suspicions were immediately raised when the unfancied horse absolutely romped home to victory by an astounding 20 lengths. How was Flockton Grey so dominant, you ask? Because the horse that ran the race wasn't actually Flockton Grey. Richardson has swapped it out for a different and much better horse, and with 20,000 staked on his horse winning in various betting shops, Richardson stood to pocket a giant sum from this win. The only issue was his horse had won by such a ridiculous margin that suspicions were immediately raised, and he was busted after an investigation revealed the plot. With a 25-year ban from horse racing, good old Ken set his sights on making an impact in the world of football. But Doncaster wasn't actually his first rodeo in football. He actually took over non-league Bridlington Town and subsequently drove them to bankruptcy within 5 years after moving the club 65 miles away. So that's a 130-mile round trip if you want to go watch non-league Bridlington Town play. So as we can see, Ken Richardson was a man of incredible sporting pedigree, and with him in charge, Doncaster must have been in safe hands, right? Ken Richardson's first act as chairman was to appoint his daughter and niece to the club board. A 3-person board. So the entire board was just essentially the Ken Richardson family, and if you think his daughter and niece were actually involved in the club, I don't know what to tell you. Next, Ken decided to advertise the club's stadium for sale, the only issue with this being that the local council owned the land the stadium was on, and they were absolutely furious with Ken Richardson for trying to sell their land without getting their consent first.
We were rather taken back because Mr. Richardson advertised our land for sale in the Financial Times and indeed in the Telegraph without any kind of prior discussions with the councillors. So we took a rather dim view of that, as you can imagine. So it didn't help relationships between the parties.
The first few years of Ken Richardson's reign were relatively tame compared to what transpired after. However, disaster struck in 1995 when the club's main stand mysteriously caught fire in what police described as a deliberate act of arson. It would be years before the culprit was actually found. Another pre-97-98 highlight was in 1996 when Doncaster manager Sammy Chung was sacked by Ken Richardson 30 minutes before the first game of the season kicked off. Nobody had actually told Sammy Chung before this he was sacked, so he arrived at the stadium fully intending to manage the game, just to find the new manager sat at his desk. Ken Richardson's trusted right-hand man and Rovers general manager Mark Weaver gave an early glimpse of his incompetence when he organised a chance for the fans to meet the players, but forgot to actually tell the fans, meaning only 7 of them turned up. Remember the name Mark Weaver because he's going to become extremely important during the ridiculous failure that was the 97-98 season. The summer before the 1997 season starts with Richardson selling Doncaster's 4 best players, including ex-West Brom manager Darren Moore. Although Richardson had previously spent money in his first 3 seasons, it seemed he was losing interest as he tried to slash costs across all areas of the club. Okay, the club had lost its 4 best players, but that doesn't necessarily mean they will do terrible, does it? Well, yeah, it does, because in their first 4 games of the season, Rovers scored 1 goal and conceded 18. One of the losses was so bad the local news had to speed up the highlight footage to fit in all the goals without overrunning. Unsurprisingly, after such a terrible start, manager Ken Richardson is sacked, and on his way out of the club he makes the astonishing claim that Ken Richardson was interfering in his team selection, a huge no-no for a club owner. Most owners would immediately deny this allegation, but not Ken Richardson, who decides not only to pick the team for the next game, but he also sits in the dugout. They obviously lost the game as well. Ken Richardson is replaced by Colin Richardson, who's not related to Ken, and Rovers actually get their first point of the season under his management. With clear deficiencies in the defence, Ken Richardson brings in experienced defender Andy Thorpe, and by experienced I mean the guy was 37 years old and had been out of league football for 5 years, before miraculously being handed a Doncaster Rovers contract. He lasts a whole 2 games before getting released. Who could have possibly predicted a 37-year-old defender wasn't the answer to Doncaster's problems?
If you thought that was a bad transfer, it got even worse when general manager Mark Weaver brings in goalkeeper David Smith in October for a must-win game against Brighton. Now, Andy Thorpe may have been ancient and out of the league for 5 years, but at least he had real Football League pedigree. Doncaster's new keeper David Smith had literally been playing for a Sunday League team in Stockport before signing for Doncaster. That's like a kid in a toy car getting signed by Ferrari's F1 team. How did David Smith catch Mark Weaver's attention? He was his neighbour.
In early October, with Doncaster winless and rooted firmly to the bottom of the table, police advised Ken Richardson to leave the stadium at half-time of a game for his own safety, as the fans' anger threatened to boil over. Richardson is never seen at the stadium again, but remained firmly in control. The manager Colin Richardson was sent packing, and Rovers' third manager of the season was appointed when respected youth team boss Dave Cowling took the job. Cowling quits after 2 games when Ken Richardson calls him from home to tell him the team he should pick. Rovers entered the 4th month of the season with their 4th manager of the season when Danny Bergara became manager of the club. Bergara brought with him an interesting tactic of swapping the players' numbers around to try and confuse the opposition. However, in comical fashion, it actually ended up confusing the Doncaster players, as nobody had a clue who they were supposed to be marking.
On this post, and
Betsy.
so you should be Betsy in the other one.
Yeah, but you done it on the numbers, and the numbers have changed. That's what happens when you change the numbers. Haven't you? Done it on the numbers.
I told him. No, I told him.
The team still didn't have a win by November, and this goal just about sums up how Doncaster's season was going. Things had gotten so bad that Doncaster Rovers fans were openly begging Essex nightclub owner Anton Johnson to take over the club. Here's a picture of Anton. Does he look like an ideal football club owner? In fact, he'd previously driven Southend United to the brink of bankruptcy and stolen $70,000 from their supporters fund, and yet now he was being viewed as the saviour of Doncaster. He eventually got bored of waiting and decided to buy Scarborough instead. They were non-league within a year. December 1997 arrived with yet another managerial change as Danny Bergara stepped down from the manager position to focus on coaching due to abuse from the fans. General manager Mark Weaver, whose experience in football amounted to his job at Doncaster as Ken Richardson's lackey and running the club lottery at Stockport, decided there was only one man for the job and appointed himself as manager of the club.
Danny's been shouted at. He rang me up on the Monday. He said, "Mark, I'm not prepared to be manager of the team and be ridiculed like that. I'll help you out on the coaching, put him off." But I'd already threatened. I said, if we get rid of him, it's pointless me appointing anybody else. I will become manager. It's as simple as that.
This guy went from running the club lottery to managing a football league club. Incredible. Here's one of his players' opinions on him.
As a person, I didn't particularly dislike him, but I didn't think he had much idea on football.
If you thought Mark Weaver's miraculous rise was incredible, then things got even better when Mark Weaver only went and won his first game in charge. It took them until December the 2nd, but Doncaster Rovers had their first win of the season. Had Doncaster accidentally stumbled into a gem of a manager in Mark Weaver? No. They lost their next 3 games by a combined score of 16-2. In their 8-0 loss to Leyton Orient, the opposition felt so sorry for them they subbed off their strikers with 15 minutes to go to save them the embarrassment of being hit for double figures. This was the career trajectory of some of the players Doncaster was trotting out at this stage. This guy was nicknamed the human oil tanker by fans for his complete lack of any mobility.
Due to players' wages not being paid, they were free to leave at any time, meaning that the players who stayed would have a revolving door of teammates the entire season. An example of this would be a group of 4 players from Manchester signed by Mark Weaver who were strongly rumoured to be serious gang members. In January 1998, striker Prince Moncrief scores his 7th and final goal of the season. Despite such a low figure and going half the season without a goal, he still ends up finishing as the club's top scorer. In February 1998, Doncaster pick up their first and only away win of the season with a 1-0 win against Peterborough. New signing Paddy Wilson puts in a great display on the wing, and fans wonder if they've unearthed a decent player. They'd never be able to find out because Paddy Wilson was jailed for 3 months days later for driving while disqualified. These guys really can't catch a break, can they? Well, no, they really can't, because that same month police announced they were charging owner Ken Richardson for arson in relation to the stadium fire that had happened a few years ago. Doncaster's owner had set his own team's ground on fire as part of an insurance scam. Ken Richardson was busted when the ex-SAS man he'd hired to torch the ground accidentally left his phone at the scene with a text to Ken Richardson saying, "Job's done." Ken Richardson is later jailed for 4 years. With the owner facing charges of arson, the funds dried up even more, and every single member of the coaching staff was laid off, apart from Danny Bagara, who stuck around to soldier on. Although his methods were probably a bit dated, Bagara actually seemed like a top bloke who really cared, and fought on when it would have been much easier to just walk away from the club and give up. Training is made voluntary and takes place in a local park with no goalposts or pitch lines, and most players skip training and just turn up for the games. At this stage, the club had 7 fully professional players left, and the rest of the squad was made up of the club's youth team. Mark Weaver makes it 8 professional players at the club by signing himself. Yeah, seriously, this guy went from lottery manager to general manager to football manager and now footballer, only at Doncaster. By this stage, relegation was of course an absolute formality. It was more just about how long they could delay it and whether or not they could pick up enough wins to avoid being classed as the worst team of all time. April arrived and Doncaster needed to beat Hull or they would be officially relegated. Feeling like they'd been ignored by the country and FA, Doncaster's fans staged a massive protest to try and get some attention on their club's plight. Incredibly, an added time on to account for the pitch invasion, Rovers actually scored the winner and pick up their 4th and final win of the season to delay relegation, for a few days at least anyway. With something still to play for, here's a motivational team talk from Captain Lee Warren to fire up the lads before their big game against Chester.
As Danny said, we're not dead, we're still alive, but in football terms, we are dead really.
With the team 2-1 down at half-time, Mark Weaver delivers his own motivational team talk to fire up the lads to turn the game around.
Just want to fucking toss it off against that. Is that what you want to go out of the league to? Or wouldn't you rather, if you're going to go out, it might be fucking Notts County, who are a better class? Or do you want it to be Chester City, who are fucking awful?
Surprisingly, this team talk doesn't work and the game ends 2-1. Doncaster Rovers are relegated from the Football League with 4 games to spare. With the club owner facing prison time, the club relegated from the Football League, and the complete lack of money at the club, many Doncaster fans feel that their final game of the season may be the final game of the club's history, and a mock funeral was held. Despite Mark Weaver promising not to attend the game so as not to incite the fans, he turns up anyway until being told to leave by police at half-time for his own safety. The final game lost to Colchester means Doncaster have officially lost the most games ever recorded in an English Football League season, cementing them as the worst team in Football League history. With good old Uncle Ken out of the picture, a consortium takes over the club in the summer, and thankfully the madness kind of ends. Doncaster Rovers don't go out of business, the chairman is no longer picking the team, Mark Weaver is gone, and normality resumes. In 2003, the club won promotion back to the Football League, where they remain to this day. The end. If you got this far, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe for more. As soon as this video goes live, I'm going to start work on my next one. So if you want to see more, make sure you hit subscribe, share the video with a friend who might enjoy it, and yeah, see you in the next one.